Fascinating.
Okay, so let's take things to the next level. We'll work back into our static logo box widget, but rather than have the image, what we'll do now is add a button into our world, and then we can drag that image into the button. And if we reset our scaling and our anchor point, so it's defaulted back to the top left hand corner, so let's put it back to the middle as we had before, 650, 650, and then of course the minus 325 and minus 325, and make sure that now when we look under our button details, we've got a whole host of different possible states. So the normal state without any interaction, when the mouse is hovered over, when the mouse is pressed. So let's kind of clear a few things out. So we want it to be drawn as an image, and we also want to make sure that we are, I think what I'm going to do, in fact, I'm going to get rid of that image and now just add it here instead. And that's the better way of doing it. So there, now it's kind of snapped in. By clicking on the magnifying glass, it obviously selects it here in the, content browser. So I can now add it for the other states and make sure that those are both set to image as well. Image, 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 one more. There we are, okay. So the point I was making about bringing in a white PNG, it just now means that, we can actually affect the tint of that. So let's have a look at starting it in a kind of Tiffany green-ish, something like that, almost. And then when we click on it, it will go to white. But before then, let's look at adding some interaction to that button. So because it's a button, when we scroll down on the right hand side here, we get some events. So we will use on click. So on click, what do we want to happen? Well, we want the logo to disappear, firstly. So let's remove from parent. And we're removing ourselves, so we can leave that to self. And then we want to access that. There's a post-process volume in the setup here that is controlling the world in black and white. So we just want to snap out of the black and white view into real world rendering in colors. So if we come back to here, now I've added a reference to that to the game instance. So same old trick, get GI, get setup, get post process mono, and then I can set enabled to off, basically. So now when I have that, and we play the game, we have the logo. So when we roll over, it turns to white. Our normal state was Tiffany green, roll over, click, and now we've entered the world. So we've got an interactive button. Now, if we want to do things slightly differently, we can make it a little slicker by coming to our event here. And rather than just enabling, disabling, we could control the fade over time. So here, for example, we could take our post-process component and set blend weight, and we can, because we're in an active blueprint, we can bring up the timeline. We can add a timeline. On update, we want to increase the blend weight. Now, we double click here on timeline and we can add a float track. We'll call that fade, just so we have a reference to it. And if we click shift and click on the mouse, it will add keyframes so that we can then select those and say, all right, well, at 0, the value is going to be 1 because the blend weight works on an alpha range, and then say at 1 second, it's going to be 0. So now we can kind of snap in between those. Now that's a very sort of linear curve. If we want it to kind of ease in and ease out, we can double click those, right click and go to break, and it will now give us that. We don't want autoplay, we don't want to loop. We'll use the last frame, and then that is in its own tab. So we click back onto the event graph and we'll add our own custom event, which we'll call fade mono. And we will always play that from the start, for example. And then we can put that timeline into that float timeline into that float there. So the one thing now that we need to do, we need to trigger that custom event. So if we come back into our static logo, so rather than just hitting enabled, we can now trigger that fade mono event. Yes, because it is already enabled, we don't need that anymore. So now it will be a combination of clicking in the world, coming here, clicking, and fading into the experience.
Live long and prosper.